A pleasant good morning to one and all present here. I am Mrs. N. Nagapushpam, Assistant Professor of English, Arulmigu Palaniyanar Arts College for Women, Palani, Dindigul District, Tamil Nadu. Happily welcoming you all to the second day celebration of World Indigenous Peoples Day. Without any further delay, I would like to hand over the session to our resource person, Dr. P. Jayapriya, Dean Arts, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English and Foreign Languages, Mother Teresa Women's University, Kodaikanal. Yesterday, in the previous video, our resource person has discussed some important topics on indigeneity and literature. And today, in this video, our resource person is going to discuss about some important topics on indigeneity and literature. My dear students, do keep watching the program till the end. Thank you.
As aborigine, the word tribe is generally used for or a socially cohesive unit associated with a territory, the members of which regard them as politically autonomous. Often, a tribe possesses a distinct dialect and distinct cultural trait. The Imperial Gazetteer of India, which was published in 1911, defines a tribe as a collection of families bearing a common name, speaking a common dialect, occupying or professing to occupy a common territory, and is not usually endogamous, though originally it might have been so. We can also define tribe as a collection of families or group of families bearing a common name, members of which occupy the same territory, speak the same language, and observe certain taboos regarding marriage, profession, or occupation, and have developed a well-assessed system of reciprocity and mutuality of obligations. So, from the study of anthropological literature, it appears that the term tribe has been used for the group of human beings whose place of residence is situated in remote areas like hills, forest, sea coasts, and islands, and whose style of life is quite different from the present day civilized men. So, anthropology and tribal study are closely related, we can say. Anthropology as a discipline of subject and research has come into existence to study the local indigenous people of Africa, Asia, Australia, and the New World. So it is because of this fact that some scholars, they criticize anthropology as tribology. Like other societies, a tribal society is also not static. Rather, it is quite dynamic. The rate of change in tribal society is very, very slow. That is why they have been backward and poor in comparison to other people. Since they have been materially backward and economically poor, attempts have been made by the government to develop them. Today, the governments of all places of the world are paying special attention towards the development of the tribals. That is, the one finds the existence of induced or planned change in tribal society. So the forest occupies a central position in tribal culture and economy. The tribal way of life is very much dictated by the forest right from birth to death. So India is also characterized by having second largest tribal, whom we call as Adivasis, where the tribal population in the world, the second largest tribal population in the world. It is ironical that the poorest people of India are living in the areas of richest natural resources. Historically, tribals have been pushed to corners owing to economic interests of various dominant groups. In contemporary India, the need for land and development is still forcing them, albeit this time, to integrate with the mainstream. So tribals lack written language of their own, but it has not prevented them from passing off their rich culture and customs from generation to generation. They speak their own dialects. Children are given names on the seventh day after birth and is usually named in accordance with family tradition. Tribes bury their, the dead in areas set apart as burial ground. Dance and songs accompany funeral ceremonies. The people have strong belief in spirits of ancestors. In the hamlet, there is a special house for worshipping the what you call as the Kula Devam. They call it as Kulakuri in their language. So whenever there is some incidence of disease, they perform puja. So the tribal arts play a vital role in transmitting the history, cultural traditions, and the way of living to new generations. Tribal songs and dances are the main media by which transmission is done. Their customs and traditions are handed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. The elders play a vital role in this process. So each of these tribes has its own distinct dance traditions, and invariably all of them are interwoven with the life of the people who dance it. So much so that it seems that some of their daily tasks are given to rhythmic pattern. In the background of mystery shrouded nature, tribal celebrations originate, and the dances which work up intoxicating excitement, physical expressions of their joys and grief, hope and fears. In some cases, the dancing is extremely simple and consists of little more than meaningless shuffling of the feet or waving of the hands. On the other side, there are very complicated tribal dances as well in which dancing harmonizes gesture, expressing the whole gamut of sentiment, where rhythm is kept by swaying the body and intricate steps executed with adept footwork. Usually the dances have a slow beginning but gather momentum and work up to a heavy tempo of vociferous climax of the drums, the ecstasy of the ever mounting rhythm of spontaneous music. So many of these dances are heroic, are martial in character. So this can be seen in various parts of India, especially in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and the other states where they dance according to the rhythms. We have the tribal dances of Kerala as you call it as Yelela Karadi, Kadarkali, Kurumbarkali, Paniyarkali, Idayarkali, Mudiyatam, Vedarkali, like so many. We can talk about the dance varieties of tribals this way. So even the theatrical performances have an unavoidable position in tribal art forms too. They have this Vedan Padal, which is very, very popular in tribal art. And this Vedan Padal would help to ward off misfortunes during the month and ensure happiness and prosperity to the members of the family. So each hill tribe has its own collection of folk plays and dances which are performed on festive occasions. So we also have the Paniyas who have their own typical devil dance to propitiate the spirits of the deceased. So you have this Thiyatam, you call it as Uchavali, which is a ceremony which is symbolic of human sacrifice, and so on and so on. You have so many. So the beating of drums, and the women, they do not participate in the dance but join in the community singing at times. So in fact, almost all the hill tribes have evolved their own characteristic folk plays and dances, as they believe that dancing and singing made their gods happy. There has been a long history of writing about the tribals in India. From very early times in history to the present day. A non-tribal person interested in tribal studies can acquaint himself or herself with the tribals of India through the means of direct social interaction, or through the various kinds of discourses on the subject of the tribal. The discourses on tribals can be located in the many various forms and genres of writing, such as the ancient and medieval Indian narratives, academic writings of history, sociology, and anthropology during the colonial and post-colonial periods. Journalistic reports, the genre of fiction and film, or even the forms of popular culture. So this can be viewed as a discourse with regard to the representation of the tribal people in India. Such discourses have largely shaped the attitudes of the mainstream non-tribal people towards the tribals, and have also created and sustained the hegemonic social structures that have led to their marginalization in history. These socio-historic factors can be recovered from these discourses if read critically. The works of the writer under study or read against the background of the larger discourse on tribals in India, as they have a thematic and stylistic relation to this discourse. So the discourse on the indigenous inhabitants of India is usually traced to the time of the encounters of these early societies with the various people who made historical invasions and incursions into the Indian subcontinent, like the Aryans, Afghans, Persians, Mughals, and finally the British. So texts like the Rig Veda, the Dharma Shastras, Manusmriti, Puranas, and the epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata contain references to the people who inhabited India at the time of the arrival of the Aryan-speaking nomadic pastoralists who settled in northern India, probably around the 3rd and 4th centuries BC. These early narratives encode the triumphant march of the new civilizations over and above the primitive tribal cultures. Both the epic contain stories like those of Eklavya, the burning of the wax house, the burning of the Khandava forest, the encounter between Rama and Ravana, the battles between the Deva and Asura, etc. So that provide ample evidence for the marginalization of tribal people, their means of life and their cultures. So the tribes were generally referred to by names like Arankya, which means as forest dweller, and Dasyu or Dasa, and also by specific names like the Savaras, Kiratas, Nishadas, Kons, Pulindas, Bills, Mundas, Orans, and Shantals, and many more of this kind. So from this initial linguistic distinction, it was a short way to the cultural associations of difference, alienness, otherness, and backwardness. So the discourse was sustained through religious and secular texts in Sanskrit that created and legitimized the concept of Aryan superiority over indigenous inferiority in all aspects of race, culture, and language. The caste system and ideas of ritual status and purity compounded these hierarchies. The segregation of the people according to caste and ritual status was accompanied by demarcation of geographical location too, and the today's tribal areas were called as the Mlecha Deshas of Esteriors. So many of the pre-colonial sources mentioned earlier and the later colonial discourses reveal the historical and socio-political reasons behind the marginalization and exploitation of the tribals in India over the centuries. Until very recently, most of the academic and popular writing about India's socio-political history took off from colonial models written by the first generation of Orientalists and Indologists like William Jones, James Mill, Max Muller, and others. These people were associated with the Asiatic Society of Bengal in the 19th century. So it is now increasingly being perceived that literature is also a discursive practice shaped by the historical, political, or social factors that determine both their themes, forms, production, and reception. So literature mediates between reality and the imagination through the medium of language and science. So they become sites where the relations between society and the individual are embodied. Language and a literary form become media through which the ideological structures that determine human relations which can be recovered. So literary criticism devises theoretical strategies that allows us to read these ideological structures in literature. So the analysis of literary texts has also been seminal to the uncovering of imperial and various other the analysis of literary texts has also been seminal to the uncovering of imperial and various other hegemonic structures of dominance. Various schools of literary criticism have analyzed literature in many ways, like humanistic, aesthetic, subjective, psychological, and sociological. But the dominant tendency has been to see literature in universal, essentialist terms. So, India has arguably one of the richest and most varied traditions of storytelling in the world, with literary traditions in different Indian languages extending 3,500 years back. So its geographical variety and diverse history have ensured that every age and every region had its own cultural and literary traditions which are so rich and varied as to be a perennial source of narratives from the indefinite past down to the present day. Narratives in the form of song, lyric, epic, legend, myth, fable, fairy tale, history, drama, dance, and so on have been composed, sung, and written down and perpetrated through generations. Some of these traditions have dominated over others, while some have been marginalized and even wiped out, while all have influenced, enriched, and complemented one another. So they form the bedrock of themes and narrative styles from which the varied literary forms of all regions spring up. So, and they were never intended or received as purely literature, but they were the historical, philosophical, political, social, religious, and cultural narratives of the land. So we can talk about this katha. In Tamil we call it as kadai, which has come a long way in India from its primary oral beginnings. The oral and written modes of expressions have coexisted in India for very long. Scholars have identified the folk elements that have gone into the composition of all the grand narratives of India's literary traditions and point out that the exchange between the various folk streams and classical stream has worked both ways. In the study on Indian narrative, we can never forget what was said by Ayyappa Panikar. He says that the rich and varied folk and tribal narrative traditions have run parallel to these grand narratives for centuries, although distant from the gaze of the majority of India's population. So the stories of the marginal, disempowered sections like tribals, women, or Dalits have been recovered from the silences, the gaps, and the liminal spaces of the grand narratives and reinscribed by later generations. The structural open-endedness of the narratives, making this possible. Such counter narratives serve not only to reinscribe the marginalized voices of the subaltern groups, but also to resist those hegemonies that prescribe the conditions for their marginality. So the novel as a literary form was imported to India during the colonial period and has been enriched by its narrative literary traditions. Even here, Meenakshi Mukherjee, she says that novel was from its beginnings a form that was concerned more with the precise location of historical man in the flux and flow of the society. So the first novel in India were therefore historical novels, followed by novels reflecting the socio-political realities of the times. And still later came the psychological novels dealing with the individual state of mind. So the use of the fictional form as a vehicle for historical statement is neither new nor impossible in the genres of literature. So historical fiction as a genre has existed in the West and in India for many centuries in different forms. From the Puranas, Itihasas, and the epics in ancient India to the historical novels in the regional languages initiated during the colonial period, history has been written and rewritten repeatedly in fictional form. So the tribal or non-tribal interface has also been depicted in various ways in different regional literary traditions in India, as well as non-literary forms like painting and film. From the Mangala Kavyas of 16th century Bengal to the modern novels in the regional languages and in English, there are innumerable examples of the ways in which the interaction between the cultures has been negotiated through narratives. So, novel in the realistic tradition depicting tribal life can be found in almost all Indian languages, forming part of the discourse on tribals in India. We have Rahul Sankrityayan's Kinnar Deshmain, Shani's and Island of Sal, Nirmal Verma's Rath Reporter, which is in Hindi, and Gopinath Mohanty's Paraja in Oriya, Arun Joshi's The Strange Case of Billy Biswas in English, and Valsala's Nellu and other novels, and Vaikom Chandrasekharan Nayar's Gotradaham, and KJ Baby's Maveli Mantram in Malayalam, Birendra Kumar Bhattacharya's Iyaru Ningam and Mrityunjay in Assamese, and Mahashweta Devi's novels and short stories in Bengali are some of the more celebrated among them, we can say. Mahashweta Devi says, I am interested in history, not only past history, but history that is being made. So this is Mahashweta Devi is a celebrated icon of contemporary Bengali literature and champion of India's tribals makes this declaration. It does not remain as empty words on paper, but is translated into committed social activism, into serious journalism, and into powerfully tensioned and evocative fictional works. So in the preface to her first full-length published work, a historical biography, The Queen of Jhansi, which was published in 1956, Mahashweta Devi speaks of how she reached history through fairy tale. The tale she heard as a child from her grandmother about the valiant Queen of Jhansi who fought the British fired her imagination and led her to a search for historical accounts of the 1857 uprising. The paucity of material on the subject due to unconscionable neglect on the part of both the British and the Indian authorities, and the deliberate suppression of facts in the available records astounded and intrigued her. So it led her on to the quest for other sources of history, which she located in the living history, found in the oral traditions of folk songs, ballads, rhymes, and popular stories preserved in the folk memory of the local people of the Bundelkhand area. For Mahashweta Devi, this journey, leaving the confines and certainties of home and family to feel the pulse of the people, proved path-breaking in more ways than one. For one, it reshaped her life in whichever sense the personal, the political, and the literary have merged inseparably. Secondly, it began her lifelong concern with interrogating history to recover the subaltern perspective in historical, social, and literary terms. And thirdly, it led her to the recovery and revival of the oral and folk traditions of discourse that are the living history and the culture of common man of India. So, this Adivasi literature refers to the literature in which the life and society of the tribals has been expressed as per their worldview, and Adivasi literature is known throughout the world with various names. In Europe and America, it is called as Native American literature, colored literature, slave literature, and African American literature, black literature in African countries, and Aboriginal literature in Australia, and in English literature, First People literature, and tribal literature. In India, it is commonly called as Adivasi literature in Hindi and other Indian languages. So the availability of, when you talk about the availability of tribal literature, the literary and academic tradition of non-tribal world divides tribal literature into two categories. One is oral literature and the other one is written tribal literature. So the oral is folk and the written is modern, or we call it as orature. But Adivasi or this tribal literate, they do not accept this division. They believe that since their world views are not in favor of any division, there is symmetry and equality in their society. So their literature is also not divided. That's the same. They call their literature as orature, means literature of oral tradition. Their concept is that their today's written literature is also the literature of their oral traditions. The concept of the orature was first purposed by Ugandan tribal writer Pio Jirimu, which was accepted by most tribal writers of the world. Among them are the, you have Ngugi wa Thiong'o of Africa and the Vandana Tet of India. Although still tribal literature, or how we call it as the Adivasi Sahitya, is more acceptable in non-tribal literary and academic world. So this orature or Adivasi literature or the tribal literature is literally very rich and priceless in its native aboriginal languages. So the beginning of the written Adivasi literature in India occurs in the early 20th century when tribal communities come in contact with modern education in colonial days, especially in the tribal areas of Jharkhand and the Northeast. Since then, this tribal literature, writing in English and Hindi and other Indian languages like Bengali, Oriya, Assamese, Marathi, etc., is on continuous progress, and every year more than 100 Adivasi books are being published in different languages. So the last decade of the 20th century witnessed the rise of a host of new movements in India. Women, farmers, Dalits, tribals, and various ethnic groups came together like never before and raised demands and issues that could neither be understood nor settled through the established theoretical and political idiom. They asserted that their exploitation was due to their specific identities, and to fight that exploitation and discrimination, they forged alliances with other group communities with similar identities and launched a joint movement for their emancipation. Since identities formed the basis of their exploitation as well as their struggle against it, this process began to be called as identitism. Besides, socio-political movements, literary movements also joined this battle against exploitation of the deprived. Feminist literature and Dalit literature were the byproducts of this particular process. Now, tribal literature, imbued with tribal consciousness, is also trying to carve out a place for itself in the world of literature and criticism. So the development of literature and of different art forms in tribal communities predated the emergence of literature and arts in the society or in the so-called mainstream society, we can say. But the tribal literary tradition was mainly oral. Even after being pushed into the jungles, the tribal communities continued their creative literary exploits. However, as this literature was in unsophisticated folk languages, and because the tribals were far from the centers of power, their literature, they themselves, was largely ignored. Even today, tribal literature is being produced in hundreds of indigenous languages, but we know very, very little about it. So I have introduced you with tribal literature today so as to take up research on it and learn more on their issues and come out with policy decision making with the government. Wish you all the best. Thank you.